The Dr. Sophie Rothschild Show, and I'm very fortunate to have none other than Einat Wilf. Dr. Einat Wilf have a PhD in political science from Cambridge University, and also a former member of the Israel HaYom. And once again, Doctor, welcome again to the show.
Thank you.
Um, let's pick up where we left off. I want to really deep dive into what's all there's been a lot of protests in Israel, and they want the Prime Minister Netanyahu to resign, and they want this and they want that, and sometimes they don't even know what they want. But it seems that they're trying. A lot of them they have ulterior motives. A lot of them are from these NGOs. Could you kind of shed some light as to what's really going on in Israel right now?
Certainly. What the Palestinians of Gaza did, and the butchers who represented them did on October 7th, is essentially trap the people of Israel into a horrific dilemma. It is, if anyone has seen the movie Sophie's Choice with Meryl Streep, it tells the story of a woman who the Nazi officer, upon arriving to the death camp, allowed her to choose between her boy and her daughter. But she had to give up one child. What the butchers of Gaza did on October 7th is they kidnapped over 250 people, and children, families, mothers, fathers, elderly women and men. And their message was, you can only get those people back if we pay no price for just having butchered you. So they conducted the kidnapping. You know, in the past, when Palestinians kidnapped Israelis and Jews, they would do so in order to try to release some butchers from Israeli jails. This was new. This time they kidnapped people from their beds on a Shabbat morning, and with the message that Israel will only get them back as long as they pay no price for their arrested genocide of Israel. And if you notice, that's what they've been doing for the last 2 years. People always say, oh, the hostages are released in deals. There are ransomed. These are not deals. Deals makes it sound like, something respectable. They are ransomed in exchange for basically being allowed to try again. And this is, by the way, the theme of the conflict. Every time the Arabs, the Palestine Arabs especially, go on a war of annihilation, and unfortunately there's no other kind, and they lose, they always manage to ransom, blackmail Israel and the West to basically try again. Mm-hmm. And this is why the conflict endures. Mm-hmm. So when I look at the demonstrations in Israel, my heart breaks, because we find ourselves essentially arguing whether to give the Nazi the girl or the boy. But we have been trapped into this terrible choice, this Sophie's choice. Mm-hmm. And I understand, especially given that I find this government highly incompetent. Okay, let's say you were going to choose victory. You were going to say, okay, we're going to make sure that the Palestine Arabs, and especially the Arabs of Gaza, never again are able to attempt a genocide. But even that is, is being so slow and undecisive. And so what's even worse is that we're trapped in this choice, but it's not clear even that this choice is available to us. So the only thing I have to say is my heart breaks, because a large share, if not the majority of Israelis, they just want the hostages back. They question, and not without reason, given, I think, again, the incompetence of this government, they question whether we can actually win. So they say, well, at least let's get the hostages. On the other hand, people are saying, well, if the price of getting the hostages is to surrender to the demands of the butchers of Gaza, well, that's also a high price to pay, which is why I say, look, it breaks my heart. We're fighting whether to give the Nazis the boy or the girl, but it's not as if anyone is on the right side of this.
And it's interestingly, I know sometimes they fully mobilize, and rather than October 7th, they mobilize like 300,000, then they cut it back, then they mobilize, and they back and forth. It's like the government. I think with Trump in office, this is a great opportunity to do some things, but I think the government of Israel may be
And do them. That's the thing. I mean, I posted a while ago, I don't know if you remember, when a few of the hostages came out looking like they just emerged from Birkenau, right? The only actual starvation in Gaza is done by the people, by the Hamas butchers to the hostages as a form of torture. This is the only starvation that is taking place in Gaza. So when some of the hostages came out looking like, they just came out of Auschwitz-Birkenau, President Trump was so rattled that he pretty much told Israel, go do whatever you need, and we didn't do anything. So I think you're absolutely right. President Trump does understand instinctively that we need to break the pattern. I call this pattern, the Jews are never allowed to win, the Arabs are never allowed to lose. I think he instinctively understands that we need to break the pattern. The Arabs of Gaza, what I call the Palestinianists, Hamas, they not only need to lose, but like the Nazis and Japanese and their collaborators after World War II, they need to know that they lost. They need to actually understand that they lost so that you can finally change something. You can only change something when people understand that they've reached a dead end. So I think President Trump understands it very instinctively. My criticism of our government is, even though we have a lot of good achievements, military achievements in Lebanon and Syria and Iran, the place that really matters is Palestinianism, because that's the only total war against the existence of the collective Jew. That goes back to the placards. So I think this is where a lot of Israelis are at this point. I think Israelis are, you know what, just pick a lane. If you're going to win, go and win. If you're going to get the hostages, but just do something.
Because the reason why I brought this up, there's a growing trend, even in America now, even in the Republican Party, of people becoming under war fatigue, or they begin to lose focus. And so I've always tell Israel, they need to really, this is a great time to move, finish it, get over it. But if you keep dragging it on, people at some point are going to get said, okay, what's going on here? So with that being said, talk to us about the food in Gaza, because a few months ago, I think I saw a video of Hamas actually stealing the food, and yet it's not being talked about in the media. So could you talk to us about the information regarding Hamas stealing the food from stealing all the food aid?
It's even worse. We created a pretend scenario where this is a war only against Hamas, right? As if the only problem are a few butchers, a few well-trained butchers, and other than that, that's it. Everyone else just stood aside. Now, we saw the euphoria in Gaza. We saw how thrilled they were. And it's not just that. Hamas, as the militant organization that represents the Palestinianist ideology, they were preparing this attack, this genocide, for years, right? They've been using the billions of dollars that the world just pumped into Gaza under this belief of like the poor Palestinians. And what we can say for sure is that the Palestinians are not some charity basket case. October 7th required years of preparation, massive investments in infrastructure. They weaponized all of Gaza. They connected the houses, the mosques, the kindergartens, the schools, the clinics. Everything is booby-trapped, connected by hundreds of kilometers of tunnels, numerous piers. The people of Hamas, except for the videos when they butcher people or they do their, crazy hostage release parades, then they wear uniforms. But other than that, they're in civilian clothing. Basically, there's no law of war that they have not kind of violated. So they've been taking all this aid and billions of dollars that have gone into the strip for years, telling a story of the poor Palestinians, which we know it wasn't. An open-air prison, we know it wasn't. I mean, this libelous campaign has been for decades, essentially blackmailing the West to give money, billions and billions. And all of that was used to plan the arrested genocide of October 7th, the one that they were not able to complete. We think of genocides as like the Nazi Holocaust, this German engineering of death camps. But in Africa, in the Rwanda massacre, just using knives, they butchered 600,000 people. I think it was in under a year.
Yeah.
If the butchers of Hamas had been able to continue uninterrupted, they would have achieved the numbers of the hundreds of thousands, the millions, especially aided by Hezbollah, by Iran, by the Arabs of the West Bank, who were also euphoric on that day. It's only the Israelis who fought back who managed to stop it. Now, immediately after, I remember this, President Biden came to Israel. He gave a beautiful speech about the evil that was unleashed on that day, which, again, we're not even close to understanding. And then he said, but Hamas doesn't represent the Palestinians, which was clearly a lie. Now, a comforting lie. I understand why people want to tell the lie. It's much more difficult to understand that it's everybody. But as a result, everybody kind of fell in line, including in Israel, and pretended that this is just a war against Hamas. Now, wars are fought collectively. You fight against Germany, you fight against Japan. Of course, civilians suffer. You try to minimize that. You allow aid to come in. But we have gone to the position where it's ridiculous. We're going above and beyond international law, which talks about just the basics, and when it's not used for military advantage. And we're essentially continuing to supply our enemy. Hamas doesn't need to divert anything because it is the government of Gaza. It's not some side organization. It controls Gaza. It controls the funding. It controls the monetary exchange when people need to get the money they get from the UN to get it for food. Hamas takes taxes. This is the government of Gaza, for the people, by the people. They don't need to divert anything because it's theirs, and they continue to use it in order to continue to wage war against Israel. And this way, the war can never end because Israel actually needs to supply its enemy. This means the enemy can never be defeated. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's interesting. You brought up a very good point of how Gaza has been weaponized. In 2005, when Israel pulled out of Gaza, then what they did, they turned Gaza into a rocket pad, launch all these rockets into Israel. We talk about they're taking the money to build underground tunnels and take pipes to build rockets. Yet people fail to bring us to the fore. But speaking of that information, we also been receiving word that Egypt has been building up its military, and they had this big new complex, one of the largest military command center in the world. What's going on in Egypt?
Um, in some ways, we're beginning to see it's two things. First, Egypt with Gaza is a bit like what Syria was to Lebanon. Officially, after the war of 1973, where the Syrians were clearly defeated and the Egyptians, thanks mostly to American intervention, got at best a tie, but mostly defeated. They basically vowed, both the Syrians and the Egyptians, to never fight Israel again. They understood that it's a losing cause. So both countries began to use the near ones. Syria used Lebanon, Egypt used Gaza, in order to continuously bleed Israel. Because from their perspective, if you actually leave the Jews alone, and that's all we've ever wanted, just to be left alone. If they actually leave the Jews alone, then the Jews do great things. They eradicate malaria in the land of Israel, and they solve the water problems that everyone in the region has, but Israel no longer has, because it figured a way to have a brilliantly priced water market and to use water filtration, and we build great technology, and we build amazing agriculture in the desert. If you leave us alone, we actually do pretty amazing things. And our neighbors don't like that. Then they have to explain to their population why they don't have great things. So they want to keep Israel as weak as possible. And Syria has been using Lebanon, and Egypt has been using Gaza to essentially bleed Israel continuously. Now, in parallel, since the peace agreement with Egypt, where Egypt got all of the territory, Syria, in many ways, happily was not willing to sign a peace agreement, so we still have the Golan Heights. What Egypt never did is Egypt got the territory, but it never began to change the mentality for peace. The education in Egypt never changed. The religious leadership never changed. Egypt continues to be one of the most anti-Semitic countries in the world, where it is part of the education, really from kindergarten to the university. And with Gaza essentially no longer being an annoyance, with Israel is realizing that Gaza brought us to the brink of disaster. A lot of people today pretend that October 7th wasn't a big deal. We were this close to being brought down, right? If Hezbollah had been joined in, if the Arabs of the West Bank and the Arabs within Israel would have joined in, as they did in previous events, if the Jordanian army would have crossed the non-protected border, this would have been over. So we now face a position where Israelis understand that we cannot afford to leave Gaza as it is. And Egypt might not be happy about losing Gaza as a way to bleed Israel. And in many ways, you see them already preparing the possibility that Gaza will basically be pushed to their side rather than what they've done for decades of pushing Gaza to our side. Again, I hope this will go in a different direction. But from the Israeli perspective, we need to open our eyes to the fact that the peace agreement with Egypt was never really peace in the deep sense of the word, And we need to begin to have some self-respect and begin to remind the Egyptians that they have commitments to really make peace with Israel and not just get the territory and have no war. The Syrians had no war with us and they didn't get the territory. The Egyptians promised to do more in return for the territory, to make real peace, and that they didn't do.
Excellent, just I like that. Talk to the recently, I think we yesterday, today and yesterday, where the thing with the Shanghai Cooperation Council. Do you think Israel should try to join it, or should we just stay at that?
I don't know enough. All I'm going to say is that there's no doubt that Israel needs to have more alliances, broader alliances. We are geographically actually well located between the West and the East. What it means to be Jewish has both a Western and an Eastern aspect. You know, sometimes my talks about what it means to be Jewish in the Jewish state, I sometimes have an easier time with Chinese and Indian audiences because they understand more the idea of Jewish as a civilization, as a people. Sometimes when I speak to delegations from Africa, they understand what it means to be a tribe. So there's no doubt that we need to have stronger, broader alliances, first and foremost, of course, in the region. This is why I want peace with Egypt to actually be peace. So I don't know enough about that specific arrangement, but I am very clear that we need to have more deeper and broader alliances, East and West.
Yes, indeed. Because
I'll just say that I have about 10 minutes that we need to finish.
right on. So I've been watching the American situation very carefully, and I've noticed, yes, we Jews, or I think the European Jews in America, like 1% of the population, yet we're very successful. We're 5% of the Nobel Prize, 5% of the billionaires, 4%, yeah, all that good stuff. And there is an undercurrent of growing resentment in the United States within some circles, even in both left and right. And I'm beginning to been telling people that we need to start diversify our alliances. We need more alliances. We can't, Trump is there right now, but we can't really rely on it much longer. So, in that regard, where do you see us reaching out to new friends going forward?
So if, again, if we do things well while President Trump is in office, then I think hopefully we'll be able to actually expand alliances in the Arab and Islamic world. And I think that's important because ultimately the land of Israel is now in the middle of the Arab and Islamic conquest, right? So we will always be surrounded by Arabs and Muslims, and those are the people with whom we need to have peace and alliances. So I hope that the ground will be established for that. India, in my view, is incredibly important. South Korea, Japan, Philippines. The more, there are important nations in the East. And of course, in the West, we have friends. We have friends in Europe. We have friends in the West. A lot of people, whether in Europe, in America, in Canada, they're not happy with some of the policies they're saying in their countries. They're beginning to say, you talked about war fatigue on the American right. I mean, they're doing nothing. I don't know why they're fatigued, but if anyone, it should be us. But you're talking about people kind of changing their view, but I'm also seeing the opposite. People are seeing all this the Palestinianism in their streets, the hate, the libels. Some people are saying enough. This is not what we want our country to be. So I think what's important is for us to never give up on any country. I don't like when people say France is lost, this is lost, America's lost, Canada's lost. No one is ever lost. We just always have to find out who our friends are. Like you said, even if it's small, support them, nourish, be in touch, let them know what's going on. We're sometimes not being helpful to our friends. We're not helping our friends understand how crazy this all is. We just think that it's obvious that everyone knows that genocidal baby killers is an ancient libels, but not everyone sees that. We need to help our friends see those. So in my view is that we need to build alliances anywhere and everywhere, Africa, Latin America. Don't give up on small countries, and never have this attitude of it's lost. We may be in a situation where right now a country has a government that is against us, but in my experience, even in countries that have governments against us, there are always groups or people who are not happy about that.
And that I can agree on because even in the United States, even in the West, I talk to people all the time, and once you explain to them what's really going on, they get the gist of what's going on. And we see now, like in Europe, they begin to start saying to these Islamists, "You need to adapt to our culture or leave." And we see it in England, we see it in France, we see it in Germany. People saying, "Look, this is Europe. You don't like it here, you can go get on a plane and go back where you came from." And I think that's a good development. And with that being said, um, give give
Last question.
yeah, last question. Give me your hope for the future.
So my greatest hope for the future, because I do sincerely believe that even when things are bad, and you need to know that they're bad, you shouldn't tell yourself lies. Like don't tell the lie that this is just a war against Hamas. Understand, for example, that Palestinianism, this singular obsession with the Jews not having a state, going back to their place is inferior. As this, we need to understand what this ideology is. We need to understand that the Arabs of Gaza and the West Bank all share this ideology. So I think we need to understand that things are bad, but not lose hope that they can change, and actually engage in policies for change. So my vision, I say that peace will come when the ideology of Palestinianism will finally be replaced by an ideology that I've come to call Arab Zionism. And Arab or Islamic Zionism, even though it sounds crazy now, I argue that one day it won't. And it's merely the Arab and Islamic embrace that says, from the Arab history, from the Islamic texts, we know that the Jews are a people of the land of Israel. We embrace that. We want to live next to you rather than erase you. We can do great things for this region, from water to agriculture to technology to space. We can see the beginning of that in some Gulf countries. We can see some of that in Israelis who are Arab. So my view is Palestinianism as a destructive ideology has to die, so that Arab Zionism can replace it as an ideology of rebuilding and peace. That's my long-term vision. That's what I work for. I call myself a long-term peace activist. Our enemies have been working long-term for decades to create the global mental mindset for our annihilation, and we need to work long-term for the idea of peace.
Thank you so much, Dr. Einat Wilf. It's a pleasure speaking with you, and hope to have you back soon. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye bye.